loving me, I loving you. Mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sisters and brothers, friends for life, won't live in the past. All I wanna do now is making it last.
It's time for another conversation. Welcome to Making It Last podcast. I'm your host, Noreen Dealer. It's all about helping us to have better relationships, not just with ourselves, with other people. And one of the ways for us to have better relationships is if we can work at how we actually deal with conflict. Now, we're going to be talking to Douglas Noll. He is the author of a book called De-Escalate, How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less. I'm going to repeat that. De-Escalate, How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less. He's an award-winning author, mediator, trainer, teacher. He devotes his life to helping people to solve intractable conflicts. And his work takes him from maximum security prisons, where he trains murderers to be peace speakers or peacemakers, to the U.S. Congressional Budget Office, where he trains senior analysts how to de-escalate members of Congress. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you, Noreen. It's great to be here. And isn't it amazing that technology allows us to be thousands and thousands of miles apart and have a great conversation?
Yeah, and in different time zones. But here we are.
And different. That's right.
Yeah. All right. So before we get into what we're going to be talking about, tell me a little bit about your book. Well, you said before we came on air, you said you're a 4-time author, so this is one of 4 books you've written. But tell me a little bit about this one in particular.
Yes, this is my 4th book, and out of 4, and I wrote it at the many requests of the inmates that I've been training over the last 10 years to be peacemakers and mediators in maximum security prisons, and they were asking for a book that they could refer their families to because they found the skills to be so powerful. So I finally said yes. I didn't think I was going to write another book after writing 3, but I finally said yes. So I wrote the book in 2016, and in the fall of 2016, my agent sold it to Simon & Schuster, and after the president of Atria, which is an imprint of Simon & Schuster, read it, she said, how fast can we get this book out? And they broke all kinds of speed records.
Wow.
I gave them the final manuscript after Thanksgiving in 2016, and they had the book published by September 17th, 2017. Nice. 8 months. Nice. New record. 9 months.
Nice.
Incredible.
Nice.
So the book's done very well. It's in 4 languages. It was an Amazon bestseller. And people are picking up the book who really want to learn how to de-escalate angry people. And the premise of the book and the premise of my work is based on neuroscience, not on psychology, how the brain actually processes conflict and emotions. And it turns out that there is a very specific technique, which we can talk about, that has been empirically validated through brain scanning studies to show how we can literally calm an angry brain down in 90 seconds or less.
Which is actually a nice...
Happens every time without fail.
Okay, which is a nice segue into what we're going to be talking about is how can we stop arguments on a personal level? So if we're going to stop the arguments, we have to de-escalate the conflict. So go right ahead and tell us about that process.
That's right. So the way to stop, this is going to sound, it's very counterintuitive, but what science is showing us is that the way to stop an argument is to listen to the emotions of the other person and not try to persuade or get your own point across or try to convince somebody to the righteousness of your cause. That's the worst thing you can do. What brain science shows is you engage in 3 steps. The first step is to ignore the words. Ignore what the other person is saying. You don't need to hear those words, especially if they are angry words. We all know what the angry words are. We don't have to listen to those words for at least 90 seconds. And then the second step is to read the emotional data fields of the person that we're listening to. And it turns out that our brains are hardwired to do this. We have an innate ability to accurately read other people's emotions. And there's some really interesting reasons why this is, primarily due to our evolutionary biology. And then the third step is, as we read the emotional data fields and we begin to understand what the other person's emotional experience is, we reflect back that emotional experience to the speaker with a you statement. So I would say something like this. If you were angry at me, Noreen, I would say, oh, Noreen, you are really angry. You're really frustrated. You don't feel listened to. You don't feel appreciated. You don't feel heard. And it kind of worries you a little bit. And you're really sad. And you feel kind of lonely and abandoned and unloved. And that's all you do. And then you wait, and you're going to get 4 unconscious responses. One will be a nodding of the head, affirmative nod of the head. 2, a verbal response like, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. 3, a dropping of the shoulders. And 4, a big sigh of relief. I call this listening other people into existence. And if you want to stop an argument, this is exactly how you do it. And in fact, if you learn how to listen other people into existence, you will never be in an argument again in your life, ever.
I know you've been enjoying the conversation, but we're going to take a little break and get a word from our sponsor.
For all your events, such as educational forums, workshops, book launches, weddings, and more, contact Noreen Daly, the ultimate MC and event host. Visit NoreenDaly.com or follow her on Instagram at Noreen Daly Jam. Noreen Daly, creating long-lasting memories.
Backtrack a little bit though. You said earlier that this is based on neuroscience and not, is it psychology you said earlier?
It's based on neuroscience, not psychology.
Okay.
The seminal study was published in 2007 by neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman, who has his lab at UCLA. And he wrote his paper is called Putting Feelings into Words. And if you Google that or Google Lieberman, his study will come up. You can get it. You can access it online without paying anything for it. And he talks about what the physiology, the brain physiology of what goes on when we label other people's emotions, which is called affect labeling. It's a form of implicit emotional self-regulation. And essentially what happens is that as you label somebody's emotions, the prefrontal cortex of the angry person comes back online because it's offline when you're angry. When you're angry, you can't think. Your prefrontal cortex is offline. But when you label the emotions, the prefrontal cortex comes back online, and at the same time, the emotional centers of the brain that are dominating the neural circuits around anger are inhibited. And so there's a process, an inverse relationship between being able to think again and being angry. And the reason that this works the way that it does is because we have, I don't want to get too much into the science, but we basically humans are not born with emotions. We're born with affect. And so we have to create emotions as cognitive constructs. So we build these things that are emotional databases that allow us to associate biophysiological reaction that we call affect into these concepts known as emotions. When we get angry, our prefrontal cortex shuts down. We no longer have access to this emotional database, and we move into a condition known as alexithymia, the inability to state our own emotions. And that just makes us angrier and more frustrated because we're feeling all of this stuff, and yet there's no way we can process it because our prefrontal cortex is shut down. When you affect label somebody who's highly emotional, whether it be anger or grief or anything else, you are literally lending them your prefrontal cortex for the 90 seconds it's going to take for their prefrontal cortex to come back online and for them to calm down. And that's why it takes 90 seconds. Actually, it takes a lot less than that.
So what, for somebody who's listening, but what then would be that distinction between psychology and neuroscience?
Well, I tend to be a truth teller. Okay. In my personal opinion, most psychology, depending upon which type of psychology you're talking about, most psychology is not based on neuroscience. Most of it is based on junk science, really. You know, if you're Freudian or Jungian or object relations theory. Those were the early theories of psychology in the 20th century. Then, of course, we moved into behaviorism and Skinner and psychology, which was all wrong. Then moved into cognitive psychology, which is a little bit more based on science. But psychologists are only studying behaviors. They're not studying what's going on in the brain.
Okay.
And we are making, and most psychology draws the wrong inferences about what's going on, because all they can observe are behaviors. Now, there's a lot that's been learned. I mean, don't get me wrong. For example, Kahneman and Tversky have created a whole new field called behavioral economics, and they were social psychologists. So there is a lot of good that comes from it. But when we really want to get into what do we need, what interventions do we need to help people calm down, to make peace, to stop arguments,
right,
then we have to look at how the brain actually processes information. And that's where neuroscience comes in.
Okay.
And it's just a very different perspective than the way that psychologists look at stuff.
Okay. All right. So you said it's basically a 3-step process. You ignore the words, read the emotional data fields, reflect the experience with you statements. No.
Correct.
I specifically have a question in relation to that one. Now, one of the things that I know for us when we're teaching in a communication class, I will tell people is to avoid the use, because sometimes people then get defensive. So how how then will we get that desired effect that you're talking about rather than people getting defensive?
Right. First of all, the kind of stuff that you're talking about is based on the work of Roger Gordon, who was the guy that invented the term active listening in the late 1960s. He was a protege of Carl Rogers at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His work was completely misinterpreted by anybody who looked at his work. And so we've had 80 years or 60 or 70 years of just wrong information out there about active listening because, like I said, his work was misinterpreted. Here are the rules. You use a you statement whenever you're going to reflect somebody else's emotions. So I would say you are angry, you're frustrated, you don't feel listened to, you feel you've been treated unfairly, you're unhappy, you are sad, depressed, lonely, whatever it might be. I'm just going to use a you statement and then the emotion. I'm not going to say you're a bad person or you're an idiot or, you're wrong.
Right.
Or you're evil. That's judgmental, and that is not reflecting an emotion. That's making a judgmental statement. So you're not going to use a you statement for that. You're only going to use a you statement for reflecting back an emotion. And you could use it for paraphrasing, too, which is, you could say, so what you said was X, Y, Z. You statements are designed to demonstrate to the speaker that you understand what the speaker is saying and feeling from the speaker's frame of reference. You're going to use an I statement only when you're talking about yourself. I'm angry. I'm frustrated. I'm unhappy. I'm sad. So I will assert my own emotions using an I statement. I will reflect your emotions using a you statement. And that's the distinction. And in neither case will I use any kind of judgmental language.
I'm smiling because how easy in the heat of an argument, so to speak, how easy for individuals not to be judgmental, though, Doug.
So here's what's really cool about this idea. Once you learn it, it becomes automatic. And you no longer you can have somebody screaming at you in your face, and you will be calm and composed and feel compassion and simply be able to reflect back their emotions and be totally centered at all times.
Whoa.
You can't, once you learn this skill, and it doesn't take long to master it, but once you learn this skill, you become an emotional master, and nobody can bother you. I mean, I remember I've trained murderers to be peacemakers. This is the foundational skill we teach our inmates. And it works first time every time, which is why we teach it. It never fails. It never fails because it's the way our brains are hardwired.
I am getting from all of what you're saying that it is a process, and it's also that people have to be open to doing this. How difficult has that been?
It's interesting. In the prisons, many inmates are called to this work. They don't know why they're called to it, but they just show up.
Okay.
And if you drop out, it's not for them. But many of them just absolutely become addicts to this. Addicts is sort of a bad word to use in prison, but they become fanatical about learning these skills because it completely changes their lives. On the outside, I've taught tens of thousands of people these skills over the years, and people who are tired of conflict, they're tired of fights and arguments, they want deeper, more intimate relationships in their personal life, and they want to become effective, powerful, wise leaders in their careers, are the ones who are attracted to this work.
I know you've been enjoying the conversation, but we're going to take a little break and get a word from our sponsor.
Does your business lack branding? Having difficulty realizing your vision? Look no further. Splinth Brand Design Consultancy specializes in developing personal and business brands. Services include strategic management, website creation, social media branding, and more. Visit them online at www.wearesplint.com. Splinth, the brand you need to succeed.
And if somebody is listening and they're saying, but some of what you said earlier sounds heavy and it sounds academic, and I'm just somebody who, I listen to this podcast sometimes just to stretch my mind, but that sounds like that's something that I cannot do on a practical level. What would be your response to that person?
My response would be anybody can learn this. If you, it's a skill. It's like learning how to walk or learning how to ride a bicycle. And the only challenge to learning this is that it's counterintuitive and it's a little counternormative. It's counterintuitive in the sense that it's hard for us to understand in the beginning how reflecting somebody's emotions can really calm them down. And that's why I spend a lot of time explaining the science so people can understand that why this works the way that it does. So in that sense, it's counterintuitive because one would never think that reflecting emotions would actually have a calming effect, which it does. It's also counternormative because we are taught to pay attention to words, and I'm saying ignore the words. We are taught not to interrupt.
True.
I teach reflect the emotions as they come up. So you are going to be reflecting those emotions as people speak. People will watch a demonstration and say, that's the rudest thing I've ever seen. You want me to do that? And I laugh and I say, you are misunderstanding what's going on here. You are applying the rules of conversation to the rules of listening. I am not having a conversation with this person. I am listening to them. Listening and conversation are two completely different skills with different rules that apply to them. So anybody can learn this skill. It's not that difficult to learn. Most people can master this with a minor amount of, once they get the education, once they understand the science and the skill. I find that most people can be pretty good at this within 4 to 6 weeks of some practice and support. I said 90% of the people that I've taught. There's some people that take a little longer,
but on average,
most people, 90% of the people I teach really get good mastery in 4 to 6 weeks.
As we're wrapping up, a lot of us, we've been taught to see arguments as a bad thing, even though the conversations about how can we stop arguments on a personal level, Doug. Are there any positives, though, that we can get from arguing with somebody?
No.
Okay.
No, not in the common way that we understand arguments, because most people are too emotionally incompetent to be able to manage the emotions of an argument. And when we talk about argument, we're really talking about persuasion. Okay. The whole point of argument is to persuade another person. And if two people have polarized views about something, no amount of arguing is going to persuade the other person to do anything. And all that's going to happen are both sides are going to get angry because they do not feel listened to. Arguing has a place in a courtroom where you have a trier of fact and a judge, and the lawyers are arguing to the decision maker why that decision maker should adopt the lawyer's particular point of view. That's where argument has its place. In personal relationships, it has no place in a personal relationship.
It's an excellent note to end on. Thank you so much, Doug, for sharing.
You're welcome.
This was Making It Last podcast, where it's all about helping us to have better relationships, not just with ourselves, with other people. I'm Noreen Daly. Until next time.
Making it last is all I keep. to do. You loving me, I loving you. Mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, sisters and brothers, friends for life, won't live in the past. All I wanna do now is making it last.